Welcome to the Sourcing Industry Landscape podcast, hosted by Don Tura, CEO and President of SIG.
So folks, I am so excited to welcome you back to this podcast. With me today is Tyler Chapo, and his title is Manager of Global Sustainability, Intelligent Labels. Now, Tyler, you come from Avery Dennison, correct?
Correct.
And when I think of Avery Dennison historically, you're the white label people. You're the ones that, everybody puts in their printers, and you do our file labels and you do our mailing labels and all that. So I was so excited when I heard about your projects around sustainability and the fact that we now have intelligent labels. So before I'd love to get into you personally, how you ever got into this. But before that, could you just explain what an intelligent label is and a little bit about what your role at Avery Dennison is?
Sure. And let me start by first saying thanks, Don, for having me on. I'm super excited to talk about not only intelligent labels, but also about transparency. And to add on to your first point, it's funny, everyone knows us as Avery Labels, but that actually hasn't been a part of our business for almost 10 years now. We actually divested the Avery Label office label business.
Oh my goodness.
Back in beginning of 2012. But everyone still thinks Avery Labels, and so it's funny. Now, of course, we're more back into the B2C realm with some of the stuff we're doing in terms of our intelligent labels. An intelligent label is really, it's not meant to say every other label out there is a dumb label, if you will. But an intelligent label is really the ability to provide unique digital identity to everyday products. So rather than a product being, a standard highlighter, now with an intelligent label, we give it unique digital identity that lives on the cloud, and now it is unique, and it's not just the same UPC, it is a unique serialized number. So now we really get a lot greater levels of transparency with that than having just a unique dumb label, if you will.
So I guess I know more of the dumb labels than the smart labels these days. But I spent a lot of time in logistics, and RFID was, something that was, groundbreaking really when it came out. But you've taken it so much further than just tracking packages. You go back, I had an opportunity to watch this incredible YouTube video that you guys have out. Fantastic, by the way. And the passion that you show for sustainability and transparency in the supply chain really came through. So can you tell me a little bit for folks who haven't seen the video? And by the way, we will include a link to it with this podcast so people can get to it. But can you tell me a little bit about how you're working with sustainability and transparency in supply chain now?
Sure. And, RFID's been, fairly widely adopted within the retail space, predominantly in the apparel space, and largely used for inventory accuracy at a retail store level. But it's now moved up to supply chains. And as it's done that, it's also moved outside of those traditional industries where it's been adopted. And so now we're seeing these new use cases kind of develop and evolve. And quite frankly, a lot of these use cases are about sustainability, they're about transparency. And it's also evolving outside of what we think of as traditional RFID, which is UHF RFID, which is the way to count and track many items like very quickly. So we call it a one-to-many interaction. Now, with where the intelligent label business unit has gone is really a variety of different trigger methods that all connect and create a unique digital identity. And so because we've been able to do this, now we're in these other industries, as I've mentioned, and now it's really keying in on these use cases around transparency and sustainability. And those are all kind of up the supply chain. And so by providing unique digital identity to items at an item level, now as the video shows, when products are sourced, they get essentially, a birth certificate. So that's a unique to that product. And as it moves through the supply chain, and it gets these events updated, and as it moves through these different nodes, that all information gets applied to that. So ultimately, when it gets down to the consumer level, if they want to know where it's come from, was it made sustainably, was it sourced ethically, does the packaging use FSC paper? Where can it go when it's reached the end of its useful life? This is all information that now we can track and provide digitally, and not only digitally, but specifically at an item level versus just, this T-shirt, a nondescript T-shirt. We think it comes from this factory. We think it went to this retailer. We couldn't really do that before, but now obviously we can, and so it provides us this much bigger opportunity to provide a lot more transparent data, not only consumers but also to the businesses, factories, everyone who's involved really, which I think is what the video shows. Is not only it benefits the consumers, but also the participants that are also on the value chain. The farmers growing the cacao, the seafood sourcers. It really provides this level of connectivity that probably wasn't possible before.
Yeah, and so while we're talking right now, we just had the first vaccine shipments delivered in the United States.
Yeah.
So this is during the COVID period still, and the traceability of the COVID vaccine is something that is absolutely so critical. People need to know exactly where it's been, who's touched it, who's held it. So we usually think of the custody as being a very short trip, but what amazed me with the video was that you go back out into the fields with the farmers for the cacao, and then the green fish, where I can actually say that this fish was caught by a licensed fisherman using humane practices. That's amazing. It used to be, this company has humane practices. Now it's down to the individual item and the apparel, where you can actually see the person who might have made your jeans or your jacket in the apparel example you had. That really blew me away. That minutia of a single item. So are you seeing more demand for this?
Yeah, I think there's in general, there's a demand for greater levels of transparency at a consumer level. Consumers, due to younger generations, are now more conscious around the impact their buying decisions have. They want to buy products that are not only sustainable, they're made ethically, and know that their dollars are going to places that have a purpose. So we talk about this, purchase for purpose notion, and so I think the ability to provide that transparency and then to connect the upwards part of the supply chains to the consumers is really powerful, because those consumers previously had no ability to connect with the farmer in the field. And you're even seeing some instances where now, because they can connect directly to that farmer, part of the proceeds are going to that farmer versus, going to, somewhere else, some other player on the value chain. And so there's an incentive there around sustainability where, the people who are managing the land directly are getting incentivized to do so. So it's a huge sustainability impact. I mean, a lot of studies show that those who, manage the land directly are the ones that are going to have, the biggest potential for, mitigating climate change and really practicing sustainable practices. And so you're incentivizing that because now you've been able to connect that, and you've done that through transparency.
Yeah, so we talk about procurement with a purpose, and the fact that, the SIG members alone manage about $17 trillion of US equivalent spend. You can change the world, bit by bit, procurement department by procurement department, sourcing agreement by sourcing agreement, through sustainable business practices and doing things like you're mentioning. So, that's so I'm a procurement nerd. I love sourcing. But I also love the fact that we literally can change the world and that we have that kind of impact. So you talk about the younger generation. I absolutely agree. You want to be able to trace. I want to feel better about what I buy. I want to know that I'm helping somebody, right down to the human level, the laborer in the field or in the factory level. But, when COVID first hit, I'll be honest with you, Tyler, I thought sustainability was going to be thrown out the window.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to go back at least the last recession, and you might be too young to remember the business impact, but it immediately we stopped talking about anything green, sustainable, carbon. We threw it all out and we talked about price. And that was all it was, bottom line impact. And I thought when we hit the pandemic, we were going to throw sustainability out again. And it really worried me. So are you seeing it really taking hold and growing still?
Yeah, it's quite frankly, great question. Really glad you asked this. It's a question that's come up a lot recently, and it's, what has happened to sustainability during the pandemic for a number of macro reasons, right? There's a whole, when we think about circular economy and reuse, there's a safety component. Should we be reusing packaging if there is potential for it to be unsafe? To your other point, do we throw out initiatives due to, bottom line impacts? The short answer is there's not been an impact to sustainability as a whole. And if anything, I think it's incentivized and really highlighted the importance of sustainability. The companies who have focused on sustainability ahead of the pandemic are the ones that are coming through the pandemic stronger. They have more resilient supply chains. They have
Right.
more resilient suppliers that they've worked with, and so they're established. It's very, companies that have higher ESG scores, or essentially, an investor rating of sustainability, have outperformed the S&P 500 during the pandemic for all the reasons that I've mentioned, and are just seeing that, hey, not only has it been sustainability has been prioritized, but I think transparency, RFID being a big one, has been prioritized. Knowing where your product is at is critical. I mean, we've all seen the videos where farmers are dumping out cow and or dumping out milk while single-handedly there's mile-long food bank lines. So there's obviously these gaps between supply and demand, and that's due to lack of transparency, lack of visibility within your supply chain. And
No,
so,
that's so true. That's so true. And that is a very visual example. To see a 2 mile long food line, and then to know that farmers are just throwing out the milk and the produce and everything else, that they can't get it to the right people at the right places. So one of the things, that we discovered is that our members have done a really good job knowing who their first tier suppliers were.
right.
Some of them even knew the next tier. But it always seemed, as soon as we got into third party, fourth party, fifth party, that's where it fell apart. And we found that a lot of people were, thinking they were protecting their supply chain by dual sourcing and having 2 contracts in place with 2 different suppliers. And yet both those suppliers were using the same third party themselves. And we were not aware of that. So, it's at one point, I swear, all roads led to China. And I think everybody was sourcing out of the same few factories, it started to feel like. So
Right.
that kind of visibility, you can see each of the people that touch the product in the supply chain now. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, transparency. I like to think of it as an attribute, and then what you get out of that is really where the rubber meets the road, and really where the value is created. You can focus on one subset of the value chain and say, okay, I just want to know what I can do at the end of life for this product. So I'm just focused on recycling. Or you can do everything else before that and know where it came from, who handled it, when it was handled. If it's a food product, when does it expire? Is it organic? And who made it, and those sorts of things. There's as I'm sure you're aware, there's recent legislation out of China around textile sourcing and cotton sourcing, and so knowing if your product's coming from those regions or other regions that may be affected by regulations are critical. And so you're going to start to see, I think, this notion of transparency move from it's a really great thing to have, to where it's, I must have it. And I think it's only going to get more and more granular. And as you do so, I think that'll enable more and more use cases. Knowing who made it, but also knowing where it came from is really just
So,
a start,
all right, so
I think.
we're at the end of 2020. So for me to say that this is a table stake and everybody's going to start abiding by it, is that 22, 24? When do you think we're going to hit that critical threshold where enough younger people have come into the market demanding transparency, and enough older companies and big companies have understood that they've got to deliver? So at some point, we have niches that know it's important, and we have providers and suppliers that know it's important, but we don't have a mass adoption worldwide yet.
Yeah.
So when do you think we will be there?
It's funny. If you would have asked me this last year, I would have said, maybe it's a 5-year horizon. There was a good study done by McKinsey last year just on the importance of transparency in apparel sourcing, and found that RFID followed by blockchain were kind of going to be the 2 most primary technologies for the next 5 years. I see it really accelerating. I mean, I think the last year, as I said, has really prioritized transparency, not just for sustainability, but even health and safety. I mean, think of now the vaccine, to your earlier point. We have to maintain this cold chain. And if the vaccine goes above, I think I saw in the news the other day, a half a degree or something like that, it loses its efficacy entirely. So, I think because of these certain macro events, we're going to see this proliferation. And we're probably looking at 2 to 3 years at maximum, I think, to where it's going to be literally embedded within everything. And it may not be called necessarily transparency. Then who knows? I think it'll just be, it's a cost of doing business, and now everyone has to sign up for it, and we use it as we do, and but I think if that happens, or when that happens, we're going to be much better off as a society. as a planet, et cetera, just because now we've created this new kind of economic model.
And I love the fact that you talk about, the farmer's the one who's going to impact climate change. It's down to that level of granularity that people, I mean, we do need this world to come together on behalf of the planet. And so so what's your background? How did you ever get into intelligent labels
Sure.
I mean, that's not a career choice most people get.
No. Well, I think that's probably because of the name intelligent labels is maybe a newer term, and that's for design, and I think it's a newer term. But my background, I went to Penn State. Originally was in supply chain and information systems. Actually went right into Avery. This is now over a decade ago.
Wow.
I've been in our RFID division in some facet for majority of that time. Actually left Avery a few years ago. Went to grad school locally in Pittsburgh, where I'm from, at Duquesne University. Got an MBA in sustainable business practices. Rejoined Avery, and so now I've kind of taken my supply chain background, my RFID background, my sustainability background. So I like to think that I'm kind of in the perfect role for myself right now. Kind of able
Couldn't
to
have
apply.
named a better role for you. I mean,
Right. So it sounds weird that it's intelligent labels maybe as a career path, but when you think about kind of where I've come and where I want to go, it's kind of right place, right time. I'm able to, really pull off of all these, experiences, knowledge that I've acquired over my short time, admittedly. But so it's been really great. I think, and as I said, I think really this is going to continue to accelerate.
that is so neat. Now, so everything that you guys produce right now, I was shocked when I started to read about your company because I really expected it to be still the paper company,
Yeah.
that I had always grown up with. And so I'm trying to see where it was. But they talk about Avery Dennison as so much more, and that you have bits and products and pieces that touch so many different industries now. So is there a place that you're most passionate about? Is it the food supply chain? Is it the apparel? Is it pharmaceutical? Is it?
I don't know. For intelligent labels, we really touch a lot of different industries. Personally, I think, if I had to say one, and I think food is a great one. Food waste is the number one. If we solve food waste, that's the number one way to combat climate change due to a number of studies. So I think that right there is really powerful. When you think about food waste, it's the number one item in landfills. It's the number one provider of methane in landfills. And food waste is not only just impacts the waste part of it, but it's also, as I said earlier, there's food insecure populations. So you really solve two problems. You grow less food, or the food that you do grow that gets wasted now goes to food insecure populations. So I think, not only are we solving problems, but we're solving problems that affect multiple stakeholders. I think that's really cool. Food is probably I'm certainly passionate about, but I think all of our industries we serve have a great case for solving inefficiencies, reducing waste. Overall, I'll call it decarbonizing their value chains. So, like I said, it's really just getting started.
That is so neat. So let me see if you see a link here. One of the things that I also thought was not going to keep the attention this year was diversity. And, and it could have been for the fact that so many people were locked down and had the news on all the time that, everybody saw, what was happening in the Black and brown communities. And maybe it was the fact that everyone's so agitated and so nervous anyways, that just all this bottled up energy came out in form of all of these Black Lives Matter protests. And whether or not you believe in that language or not, do you think some of that awakening also can apply to the transparency that you're talking about?
Oh, I think it's absolutely interconnected. I couldn't say that 1,000 times more. It is so interconnected. And you asked earlier, like, what's happening with sustainability? I think in general, there's been this notion of, do we focus less on the E, the environmental, and more on the social? And that was kind of due to the pandemic, and then obviously due to the challenges that you mentioned earlier. But then that's kind of, then we've thought about it, and in general, they're interconnected. So we should have always been focusing on them because they're interconnected. And the best example about that is the pandemic itself. It is a respiratory illness. So pollution has a big effect on it, right? And so areas that are higher pollution are also typically in underserved communities as well. And so not only these populations dealing with the pollution, but now they're also dealing with the pandemic. And so you really see this convergence between the environmental and the social. And so that's really coming through. And I think in general, diversity and so the D&I is really critical to sustainability. I mean, it is a key component in my view. I think diverse organizations, largely perform better. They're more creative, and so I think focusing on diversity and inclusion that's absolutely table stakes. I mean, every company should be doing that. They should have a goal on it. They should be focusing on it. It should have happened prior to everything that's happened this year. But I'm encouraged to see the action that is happening so far. Probably a lot of long ways to go for a lot of companies and industries, but I think you're going to benefit the social aspect, the environmental aspect, and overall sustainability is going to win.
I love that. So, I do see, it's hard when 300,000 people are dead to say there's ever a silver lining in a pandemic.
Yeah.
But if there is a silver lining, we do find that companies are able to hire more diverse by having people work from home, and they get diversity of thought, they get diversity of interests, they get diversity of just, religion, personal backgrounds, conservative, liberal, and that does make such a more well-rounded organization. But I also see how this is going to drive the need for things like sustainability, intelligent labels, transparency, because with all these people all around the world now that are working together, you want to be able to follow that supply chain very, very closely. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I am a huge fan of yours now because
Great.
You are doing something so cool. And I really hope our members dig into this and talk about it for their supply chains. I would love to invite you back at a later date and talk to you about your journey post-pandemic. How are people grabbing hold of this? And then, like I said, I'd love the video. I'm going to put a link to it in the podcast so people can view it. And when we go back to having live events, I would love to feature you one day. So come in and tell the story if you have the time.
Absolutely. No, and Dawn, it was absolutely my pleasure. I really appreciate the platform and getting just a little bit to talk about the things that are going on, and also talk about, I think, solutions and that really benefit the greater good. And it's not just Avery Dennison; it's really all of us. I think the goal and in this coming together is we're seeing a lot of different groups work together that maybe were competitors and now they're collaborators because we're solving these macro issues, and ultimately everyone wins. And so I think seeing that's really encouraging. And so your audience out there, I think keeping that in mind is great, because I think that's what's going to continue to happen post-pandemic even. And I would certainly love to come back and speak again.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the rest of the story. A year from now, how far has it come, and compare where we stand today.
Excellent.
I would love that. All right. Well, thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy wherever you may be today. Keep your family safe and healthy, and I will see you on a podcast very soon.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Sourcing Industry Landscape podcast through iTunes or your favorite podcast app. Want to nominate someone for an interview? Email us at info@sig.org.